Good evening, everyone. I think we may have a full complement of members present at the meeting. Item 1 is apologies for absence. Vicky, do you want to report on any apologies?
Yes, thank you. Councillor Sutcliffe has given his apologies and he hasn't appointed a substitute. So that is everybody in attendance. Thank you.
Okay, and do you think it'd be a good point to take a roll call of members?
Yes, I'll do it at this point. So if I can just call your name out, and then if you could just unmute yourself and let me know that you're present, please. So I'll start off with Councillor Brockbank.
Yeah.
Councillor Myers.
Yeah.
Councillor Pringle.
Present.
Councillor Rose.
Yeah.
Councillor Shuttleworth.
Present.
Councillor Staveley.
Present.
Thank you. That's everybody.
Okay, thank you, Vicky.
So,
Agenda item 2 is appointment of chairman and vice chairmen. Would someone like to propose and second chairman and vice chairman of the subcommittee?
I'll propose Councillor Staveley as chairman.
I'll second that.
Councillor Myers as vice chairman.
Okay, thank you. Did you get that, Vicky?
Yeah, Councillor Staveley as chairman and Councillor Myers as vice chairman. So can we just do a vote on that, if that's okay, please? So I'll just call your names out again, if that's okay. So Councillor Brockbank.
Yes.
Councillor Myers. Councillor Rose.
Yes.
Councillor Shuttleworth.
Agreed.
Councillor Pringle.
As nobody seconded Councillor Myers, could I do that, please? And yes, I agree.
Thank you. Okay, so that's carried. So it's Councillor Myers and as vice chair and Councillor Staveley as chairman. Thank you.
Right. So I'll take charge of the meeting then, if that's okay, members. Can I just check everybody's familiar with the virtual raised hand function, are they? When they want to speak, am I getting some raised hands, virtual or otherwise? Brian, have you paused? Oh, yeah, hello, yeah, there we go. Right, that's excellent, thank you very much. Right,
Sorry, I didn't get it right yesterday. I look under participants, don't I? Is that right? No?
Yes, have you got the tab down the right hand side of your screen with the list of participants in?
Just the bottom. Got it now. Me, yeah. So I can mute and unmute myself. How do I raise my hand?
There's a button at the bottom, Councillor Rose, on the right.
Oh, got you. Yes, I'm going to have a practice, if I may.
Yeah.
Does that work?
That's it.
Thank you very much. Apologies for that.
No problem. We'll keep everybody muted until they need to speak and then sort of go down that route. Seems to work best, I think, all round. Right, item 3, confirmation of minutes, members. Have I got a proposer and a seconder, or has anybody got any issue with the minutes of the previous meeting? Right, Councillor Shuttleworth, I take it that's a proposal, is it?
Yes, Chairman, yes.
And have we got a seconder for that? Please, members who are there. Councillor Brockbank. Excellent. Right. Item 4, public participation. Guy, Vicky, have we got members of the public wishing to speak?
No, I haven't, Chairman. Thank you.
Right, that's excellent. Then we'll move on. I mean, clearly, I think our online meetings have become I won't say an internet sensation, but certainly we are getting better attendances from members of the public to our meetings than we ever have done when we were there in all our glory in the council chamber. So to that end, because I think some members of the public, I mean, obviously we've got new members on the committee, but I think some members of the public may not be clear on what spatial planning is about. And I think it's clear, it's worth making the distinction that we are here to discuss planning policy. We're not here to discuss individual applications. We're merely looking at the policies that are then implemented by the planning committee. We obviously have members of the planning committee on this committee as well. I'm sure they're sort of all too familiar with their own duties to discharge on that function, but I think it's worth making the point here that that's what we're here for. Declarations of interest, agenda item 5. Members, have we got any declarations of interest? Nope. Righty. So, agenda item 6. Obviously, to keep us on our toes, central government have given us the gift of a white paper that is apparently going to help planning in the future, potentially. Obviously, at this stage, it is just a white paper. It isn't a document that we can work to as such, but I think it's important that we as members of the planning policy team have an understanding of what this is at this stage and what it may be at a later stage. So to that end, Ruth, if you'd like to give us a verbal update on that, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so as has been mentioned, I'm going to give you an update on the a verbal update and to try and summarise the planning white paper that was published on the 6th of August, Planning for the Future, which proposes a major reform of the planning system, and in particular for plan making. So it proposes to seek a simpler, faster and more predictable system, which all sounds quite familiar because if you remember back in 2010, Eric Pickles proposed similar reforms to the planning system. So we have been here before. So members may, you may be familiar with the current proposals because they've been reported widely both in the local and national press. But I'm going to try and just give a fairly brief summary of the key proposals that relate to planning policy and local plan work. So the first key proposal, obviously, is the white paper is proposing a new style development plan, a new style local plan, which is supposed to be simplified. So basically, that would include 3 areas of zoned land. So the first type of zoned land is growth areas, which are suitable for substantial development. And these would include development such as new settlements, urban extensions, and areas for redevelopment. The second type of zoned land are renewal areas, and these would be suitable for smaller scale development. So, for example, infill of residential areas, development of town centres, and perhaps rural areas that aren't protected. And that brings us on to the third zoned area, which are areas that are protected. And they are areas that are things like the AOMB, conservation areas, local wildlife sites, areas that are of significant flood risk, local green space areas that have been designated at a local level, and areas of open countryside. So they're the 3 types of zoned land that a new style local plan would include. The plan also, a new style local plan would be, in terms of housing targets, the white paper is proposing that each authority will be bound by housing targets set up by central government. So that's obviously a change from the locally defined housing targets that we have in our current local plan. And that they will be calculated using a revised standard method for calculating that housing need. So the local plan's job would be to identify and allocate land for housing to meet that target, and it's not it wouldn't be the role of the local plan to identify what that target is. That will be given to us by government. Development management policies in the new style local plan will only relate to growth areas and renewal zoned areas. So they would be, we'd have in this new style local plan, there'll be a lot less development management style policies, and that the updated Mppf will be a primary source for policy for development management. Basically, the development management officers would look at the Mppf for that. The white paper is proposing that local plans are supplemented by local design codes, which will follow a national design code. The government are proposing to set up a new body to support local authorities in preparing these locally produced design codes. And they have a proposal to expect each authority to employ an officer, a design-based officer on that. And also neighbourhood plans are to be retained. That's another aspect of the white paper. So in terms of the process of preparing these new style local plans, if we just run through that quickly, local authorities will be required to adopt a new style plan either on over a 30-month time period or a 42-month time period once the legislation has been brought into force. So we have to wait for the legislation, and then that time period would start. So for Craven, we expect that the 42-month timetable would apply, as it's likely that our local plan will be adopted within 3 years before any new legislation is brought into force. Obviously, it depends when that legislation is brought into force, but we expect that. So, you know, we expect to be looking at a 42-month timescale for that. Local planning authorities and the planning inspectorate will be required to meet a statutory timetable for preparing the local plan, which is split into key stages. So either that 30-month timetable or 42-month timetable is split into 5 key stages that relate to public consultation and call for sites, actually preparing the evidence and drafting the actual plan itself, submitting the plan to the Secretary of State and the examination, and then actually the final stage would be actually adopting the plan. So it's split into those key stages. Local plans would be subject to a single statutory sustainable development test, which that would replace the sustainability appraisal process and the existing tests of soundness, which the plans are examined against. The white paper proposes a simpler framework and quicker framework for assessing environmental impacts, which would replace the strategic environmental assessment and the habitats regulations assessment, so the SEA and the HRA. So that will be replaced. And that local plans should be visual and map based, be able to use, be able to look at from all devices and phones and everything, and also expected to be produced using a standard template. So I suppose that local plans across the country will all look similar because they'll use the same template. In terms of infrastructure, the white paper proposes to merge the SIL systems and the current SIL and Section 106 systems into a single infrastructure levy. So that's quite a big potential change. And in terms of the Mppf and climate change, so the Mppf would be updated to reflect the proposed reforms or the actual reforms. And in terms of climate change, the white paper is proposing that from 2025, the government would expect new homes to produce 75 to 80% lower CO2 emissions compared to current levels, and that these homes would be zero carbon ready, so that no homes produced under the new planning system need to be retrofitted. So that's a sort of whistle-stop tour of the white paper in terms of local plan work. In addition to the white paper being produced and published by the government and consulted on, the government's also consulting on another document which is titled Changes to the Current Planning System, and that sets out shorter-term measures to improve the immediate effectiveness of the current system. And these measures include changes to the standard method for assessing local housing need in terms of using the standard methodology, securing first homes sold, so their properties to buy, and they're sold for discount to the market price for first-time buyers. We'll touch on that a bit more at agenda items 7 and 8, perhaps. And also, this document proposes to temporarily lift the small sites threshold below which developers do not need to contribute to affordable housing. So in our policy, in our local plan, that threshold is 10 units. And this document is proposing to increase that small site threshold to 40 or 50 units outside designated rural areas. So for Craven, that would mean Skipton and all the area from Skipton moving down to into the South Craven area as well, that aren't designated rural areas. And then finally on that, this separate consultation document, it proposes to extend the current permission in principle, which is currently given to sites that are on our brownfield register, part 2 of the brownfield register, and extending that to major development. So so that's a summary, and a very brief summary of what's in the white paper and what's in the document on changes to the current planning system. The white paper specifically sets out the government's, it's a vision for planning reform of the planning system, but it doesn't provide much detail at the moment. And obviously that will be set out in legislation and national policy changes that will be brought forward following the public consultation. So the public consultation on the white paper runs to the end of October, and the consultation on the other document is, I think, till about mid-October. So obviously we'll have to wait to the end of the consultation, and then they'll respond to that consultation and then bring legislation and national planning policy forward, which obviously takes a bit of time. So we'll have to wait to find out how the proposals will translate into the new policy and legislation. So when this legislation and policy changes are brought forward, then there will obviously be implications, or likely to be implications, for reviewing and updating and necessarily preparing a new style local plan. But at this stage, I think it's important just to note that Craven currently has a recently adopted local plan, which has statutory status and will continue to be used to determine planning applications up to the point when either an updated plan is adopted or a new style plan is adopted, which is obviously going to take some time. So basically, it's to use the term, it's business as usual in trying to implement the plan we've got and use the plan we've got, preparing supplementary planning documents to supplement the existing policies that we've got in the adopted plan. And to look at the monitoring review of that plan in line with the current Mppf. So the reports that we're presenting tonight relate to the implementation of specific policies like the affordable housing policy and SP4, together with a proposed approach for that monitoring and review process as well of the adopted local plan. So of course, once national policy and legislation is brought forward, it may be necessary to review the work that we're currently doing, but that's going to be for the future. So just to round up really, that we are planning on bringing a report to the next meeting of Craven Spatial on the 22nd of September, giving you a bit more detail about the planning reforms that are in the white paper and the other document that relate to spatial planning work. And then that would provide members with an opportunity really to have a look at the more the detail of those proposals and have a discussion about that. And then in the hope that discussion would then inform the council's formal consultation response on the white paper and the other document as well. So so I hope that that this sort of quick verbal update provides a sort of an adequate explanation of the proposals. And if I can hand back to you, Chairman, and I don't know if there's any questions.
Yeah, thank you. That was very helpful. I'm sure we could spend an embarrassingly long amount of time talking about this, but at this moment in time, I don't really feel there's a lot of point in us fielding questions on what is just a white paper. we could comment on how sound we think the ideas are, but as I say, until we get more flesh on the bone, and clearly a report being brought back to our next meeting should suffice for that purpose. I think we leave it at that. I don't think we really need to be sort of taking questions on it, because as I say, it could soon develop arms and legs, and we've got a lot to get through. So thank you, Ruth. Keep us posted if you would. And on to the next item, evidence on the need for and supply of affordable homes for first-time buyers and renters in Craven District, entry-level exception sites. Is it David that's presenting this, I believe? Yep. So over to you, David.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Before I start the presentation, I'd like to refer members to the attendance of Jenny Kerfoot, the Strategic Housing Manager of the Council, and Michael Bullock, Director of ARC4 Housing and Planning Consultants. They both had considerable input to the evidence document that we're asking you today to approve, and will be available to answer any questions if required after the presentation. You've just heard about the sweeping changes proposed by the government. Ruth also touched upon some policy measures proposed by the government that could be introduced without new legislation and relatively quickly through changes to the Mppf. One of these policy measures is in relation to first homes, and it relates to the subject of this report. I'll come back to this, but firstly, summarise very quickly what officers are asking of members in relation to this report. Paragraph 3.1 of the officer report provides a good start. It explains what entry-level exception sites are and compares and contrasts them with rural exception sites. I think most of you are familiar with rural exception sites, and as both names suggest, they're an exception to normal planning control over market housing. And subject to the demonstration of housing need, they can both be allowed outside the main built-up area of settlements on land not allocated for housing in a local plan. Whereas the need for affordable housing on rural exception sites should be justified by local parish-based assessments, the need for entry-level affordable homes is assessed at district-wide level. Whereas rural exception sites provide for most types of affordable housing, entry-level exception sites are to focus on the needs of first-time buyers and renters who cannot afford to buy or rent on the open market. However, there's similarities between those two, but paragraph 3.2 explains why, unlike rural exception sites, the Craven local plan does not include a specific policy on them, on entry-level sites. Furthermore, the council's evidence on housing need for the local plan does not address the scale of need for entry-level affordable housing. Hence, for the council to respond appropriately to planning applications for this new concept, additional evidence is required. This report provides that evidence, and members are being asked to approve it in the appendix to the report and publish it on the website. Derived from the council's existing strategic housing market assessment, the need for these entry-level homes from 2017 to the end of the plan period is estimated as at least 450 dwellings. Looking at the likely amount of these dwellings that will be built across the district, taking into account relevant past housing completions, current planning permissions, and any likely future provision of entry-level homes on local plan allocations, the supply is estimated at 352. Hence, the conclusion of this evidence is that by the year 2032, there'll still be a shortfall of at least 98 affordable homes for first-time buyers and renters, and therefore the need for these homes is not being met by the current local plan. That's not surprising at all, because we had to accept in the local plan examination that we weren't able, due to environmental constraints, sustainability constraints, we weren't able to adopt a higher housing requirement, which could have met the whole need for affordable homes. So it's just to emphasize, it's not surprising that there is still a need that's not being met for these types of affordable homes. The key thing is approving this evidence and monitoring planning permissions for affordable homes, including entry-level homes specifically, will allow the council to make informed decisions on the potential release of entry-level exception sites. The next item on the agenda also provides officer advice on how the local plan and the Mppf should be used in the decision-making process on these types of sites. Returning to the latest government proposals, it's proposed that these exception sites be named or renamed as first home exception sites and will only be available for first-time buyers. If this becomes enshrined in the updated Mppf, then the council would need to review the evidence accordingly. However, we don't know a definite date for this. We don't know exactly what will be said. And there are, I understand, an application pending for an entry-level exception site. So it remains important that we approve this evidence now to use for development management purposes. Last but not least, the appendix also provides, the appendix to the report also provides up-to-date evidence on what is genuinely affordable for first-time buyers and renters in Craven. This will provide useful information for the council's strategic housing team in their discussions with developers to ensure appropriate rental and purchase costs are available for those in housing need in Craven. That's my main presentation, but I just have to add to that, as a result of Councillor Pringle responding to the agenda's request for members, if they have queries, to contact officers and authors of the report. Councillor Pringle wrote to me and raised a couple of issues on the costs of affordable housing. Officers have responded on this matter, and Councillor Pringle has asked that the information or the message in that response is passed on to the committee. So very briefly, as the final part of the presentation, the following extracts provides the relevant information on this issue for members. You are correct in saying, this is responding to Councillor Pringle's query, you're correct in saying that the conclusions of the ARC4 consultants report is that to be genuinely affordable for entry-level affordable housing in Craven, rents should not exceed £521 each month and purchases should not exceed £145,000. In your email, you then refer to an apparent anomaly because you have noted that the price of a two-bedroomed affordable home in Skipton as being £239,000. Clearly, that's a market value which is considerably higher than the purchase ceiling that has been picked up in the evidence that we're providing today, which is £145,000. The letter went on to say, however, this apparent anomaly can be explained because shared ownership of such properties significantly reduces the cost to the purchaser. Subject to an assessment of affordability, the purchaser will only have to pay for a mortgage of between 25 and 75% of the market value at first occupation. The purchaser will also be able to put down a much smaller deposit than standard purchases, often 5% of the market value. There is an additional cost to the purchaser in terms of a subsidised rent to the housing association on the remaining market value of the property. But all those things put together and the council's strategic housing team's discussions with developers mean that through the use of shared ownership, the costs to the household can be made affordable, and there is no anomaly between the conclusions of Art 4 report and the price paid by those in need. Thank you for listening.
Right, thank you for that, Dave. Yeah, I don't think any members have got an issue with us trying to help our first-time buyers get onto the housing market. I must admit, the example that's given there, it must be a very desirable part of Skipton, 239,000 for a two-bedroomed home. But anyway, I obviously don't know Skipton that well. But just for future reference, members, Councillor Pringle has obviously asked questions, as was invited. Could I ask all members, if you are asking officers questions, could you please copy all members of the committee in, and then officers, could you please give the answers to the whole committee at the actual meeting? It's just really in the interest of transparency, because I say once again, I refer to the fact that these are public meetings. So while very valid points may be raised, as has been, it might escape the public gaze exactly the context of what your answer was. So just for future reference, so that everybody knows where they stand and everybody understands what's being asked. Invite questions from members. I've got a little blue hand or white hand on a blue background from Councillor Brockbank. I'll go with you first, please. Would you like to unmute yourself, Linda?
Sorry, I had to control my mouse onto the big screen. Yes, it's a question through you, Chairman, of David Sykes regarding the 2-bedroom stipulation for affordable homes. As I understand it, these affordable homes are for people who might be divorced or might have been living with someone and have not owned a house before. Sorry, don't own a house at the moment, or they've owned a house and they've got some capital from the sale of a house, or they've been renting a house previously. So it could be that they have got 2 children of, it could be a single parent with 2 children of 2 different sexes. And this could be if they've been renting previously. It could be that they it's the first time they bought a house. Well, unfortunately, 2-bedroom houses wouldn't satisfy their requirement because they'd have 2 children of different sexes. Is it, and I think I know the answer, but anyway, is it mandatory that all these houses have to be 2-bedroom, or will there be 2- and 3-bedroom houses, or even 4-bedroom houses? Do they have to be 2-bedroom houses? I think some can be single-bedroomed as well, can they? But I'll wait to hear the answer. Oh, Jenny's waving her hand about, by the way.
Yeah, Jenny, would you like to come back on that? I'm assuming you have some answers and some wisdom for us.
I've got some answers, not necessarily some wisdom. Yes, you're quite right, Councillor Brockbank. In the past, most of the first-time buyer housing we've done, a bit naively, I think, as you point out, was for single people and couples, or at least we assumed that that would be the likely first-time buyer market. And indeed it is. There's a huge single person household and couples. But as you point out, there is a growing blended family type market out there. There are any number of people coming out of failed relationships, divorces with children who need 3-bedroom homes. Unlike rented homes, sorry, that's me. That was the son of my own blended family. Sorry. So yeah, so unlike rented homes, people who are looking to buy shared ownership homes can have any size house they like. With welfare reform changes, as you pointed out again, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom houses. You can't put single people and couples in 2-bed, 3-bed houses. So initially, and on the back of the evidence in the SMAR, which again pointed to a much higher need for smaller units, that's what we did. What we're now doing is we're targeting shared ownership properties of 3 beds, 3-bed size on the new developments that are going through. So moving forward, yes, people will have the opportunity to go for those properties.
Thank you, Jenny. Councillor Brockbank, take it that satisfies you, right? And amendments, Councillor Pringle, if you'd like to unmute yourself, please.
Just very quickly, I'd like to thank the 2 officers that have given us presentations so far, and I'd like to thank all the officers that have responded to the questions I've asked them this week very promptly with answers that are very satisfactory. So thank you to the officers.
Thank you, Councillor Pringle. We aim to please, as the saying goes. As I say, we're all trying to do the best for Craven here. I think that's fair to say. So the processes like this are quite vital that we keep ourselves up to date with the needs of our residents and hopefully try and meet them. Councillor Rose, would you like to unmute yourself, please?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. With respect to these excellent affordables, should the residents move on, perhaps they find they have greater disposable income and perhaps wish to move on to a different property, or maybe they have to move out of the area, what happens to that property should it then become vacated? Is it then available again for those in need? And the second last question, if you don't mind, sorry, is can somebody buy the whole lot with regards to shared ownership? Is it possible then later on to purchase the whole of the house, so to speak, and therefore depriving us of suitable housing stock of an affordable nature? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rose. I'm assuming that Jenny is once again going to be the font of all knowledge. Jenny, would you like to unmute yourself, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, if you want to sell your shared ownership home, you sell what you own. You sell a 25% share, a 40% share, and the housing association or the council that owns the remainder will recycle it. That's the first point. So that will just go around, and you'll make money or lose money on your share, just as the housing market would. You can, in most areas, buy your shared ownership home outright. You can't in designated protected areas. In some rural parts of the district, it's capped at 80% ownership. But in the majority of the district, you can buy additional chunks so you own it outright. What happens with that money is that it must be recycled into additional affordable housing provision. And what we've written into the legal agreements in Craven is that that additional provision should be in Craven. Ordinarily, it would be anywhere in the country, but we sign up with developers to ensure that it's recycled into Craven. That's including the shared ownership properties that the council owns.
Jenny, if I just come back on this, because I've clearly spent far too long on the select committee. I seem to recall us looking at affordable housing models. Am I correct in assuming that the distinction is what you would call a rural affordable house and an urban affordable house in terms of the ability to staircase out?
Yeah, there's a statutory designation in a designated protected area. It's defined by statute, and it sets out those areas where the right to buy doesn't apply, but also where staircasing of shared ownership homes doesn't apply either. So it's capped at 80% in some of these rural areas. I couldn't list them off the top of my head, but there is a list of them.
Just out of interest, is that list held by the council? You know, if members wish to see, they will be able to get hold of it.
Yeah. There is a statutory instrument, and it lists all the parishes where shared ownership houses have to remain at 80% cap. The reality, to be fair though, is that people rarely staircase out. When they buy the first chunk in a shared ownership property, they buy as much as they can afford, and really they have to have they have to marry a footballer, or they have to get multiple sort of job promotions to be able to buy the whole thing outright. It's not designed really to be bought outright, but there's that added protection in the rural areas.
Right, thank you. Councillor Shuttleworth, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I don't know whether I'm jumping the gun a bit, but in view of the fact there's a forecast shortfall, are we therefore going to be looking at an allocation of additional areas of land to satisfy this shortfall, and particularly so because relatively recently the government reduced the percentage or anticipated percentage affordable ratio, shall we say, on an overall development from 40% to 30%.
Well, you should say that, Councillor Shuttleworth. We're thinking we could build them all in MC. David, I believe you look like you have some answers.
David, you need to unmute yourself, please.
Right, sorry about that.
That's okay.
No is the short answer to the first question. We're not going to be allocating more land because A, we already have an adopted plan that was considered sound and considered to allocate sufficient land to meet a sufficient amount of the affordable housing need based on the local environmental and sustainable circumstances of Craven. So certainly nothing in terms of allocations in the short term. It has to be said, as far as this new style local plan is concerned, we just don't know how that's going to pan out, because we're going to be given a housing requirement from the national government. So how exactly that relates to our affordable housing need, we don't know at this moment in time. What we will potentially get, because of the government's promotion, if you like, of first-time buyers and renters at the moment, housing, is potentially a number of applications for these exception sites on non-allocated land. And we will have to consider those in relation to what the local plan policy says and what the Mppf says. But the first step in that process is whether or not there isn't the need is not being met, and what that says, and what this, approving this evidence will mean, is that the first hurdle to allowing those sorts of sites on unallocated land will have been met, because we're not currently providing for that need. There are, we may discuss what we're proposing in the next agenda item as to how that will be controlled and managed. But the point is, yes, we might be finding more applications on exception sites.
Right, thank you. Just out of interest, I mean, when we're talking about these exception sites, these are purely affordable housing sites. They wouldn't be mixed purpose sites with market value and affordables as almost like a Trojan horse to get sites built that wouldn't do outside the local plan. Would that be correct? David, if you can come back to me, and then I've got Councillor Pringle.
Sure. The normal circumstances are that they should be 100%, as it stands at the moment, they should be 100% affordable housing. Part of the government's changes that are proposed is suggesting that if that's not viable, and if the only way of bringing forward first-time buyer homes on an exception site is to have a a small proportion of market housing, then that is something the government are looking at the moment.
That sounds a lot like a Trojan horse. Anyway, Councillor Pringle, your hand's gone down. Do you wish to speak still? No, right, that'll do. So, members, I think we should move to the recommendations. Recommendation 2.1, approve the evidence appended to the report as a material consideration to inform decisions made by the council on relevant planning applications for housing development. And point 2.2, publish the appendix to this report on the council's website. Do we need to take a vote on this? Do we know?
I think, Chairman, because you're actually approving the evidence rather than just noting the report, I think if we can just do a vote where I'll call out your names, and if you could just say whether you're for, against, or abstaining, please.
Thank you.
It'll only take a minute. There's not that many of you. Okay, Councillor Staveley.
Chair, just before we move to the vote on that, have we had the proposal moved and seconded in terms of the recommendation?
No, we haven't, Alex, Mr. Strickland.
Just to check.
So, can somebody propose it then, please, and second
I'll
it?
propose it. I'll propose it.
Okay.
We've got Councillor Brockbank who's a seconder, I believe. She's waving her hand.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you. Okay, Chairman, Councillor Staveley.
Approve.
Thank you. Councillor Brockbank.
Approve.
Councillor Myers.
Approved.
Councillor Pringle.
Approve.
Councillor Rose.
Approve.
And Councillor Shuttleworth.
Approve.
Thank you. That's unanimous, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, members. Right, so moving on to item 8, affordable housing supplementary planning document, the draft for consultation. Now, who's presenting this? Is this David again, I believe? Yep, that's David. So I'd like to hand over to you, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. So, the Craven Local Plan Policy H2 sets out the development plan policy on affordable housing. The plan's supporting text commits the council to publishing a supplementary planning document on affordable housing. These are called SPDs. You may be familiar with them. As stated in italics at the end of paragraph 3.1 of the officer report, SPDs are documents which add further detail to the policies in the development plan. They can be used to provide further guidance for development on specific sites or on particular issues, such as design. Supplementary planning documents are capable of being a material consideration in planning decisions, but are not part of the development plan. So, an SPD on the issue, the very important issue of affordable housing, is clearly one which meets this definition. It's been read by the council's local plan barrister, Michael Bedford, QC, to ensure it is legally fit for purpose. Affordable housing policy and the plan's policy on affordable housing is a relatively complex one, and one which is very important for applicants to fully understand right from the start of the process. The SPD will guide applicants through the policy and process requirements in order to maximise the chances of submitting a successful planning application compliant with the local plan. The SPD will be used by many interested parties, including house builders, developers, registered providers, and of course, the council. And they will use those on the many planning applications coming forward on allocated windfall and exception sites over the coming years. After providing the context to the SPD in part 1, part 2 provides guidance on how each of the policy's 10 criteria will apply to different development proposals. So there's lots of combinations there. There are also other policies in the plan which are relevant to applications which involve the building of affordable homes. For example, the SPD recognises the importance of proposals meeting the requirements of policy EMV3 on good design, including sustainable design and construction. Over to part 3 of the SPD, which provides guidance to applicants on the importance of early pre-application discussions with the council, and also on the information required to support a valid planning application. This part of the SPD is divided into guidance on the following types of housing: general market housing, clearly only where this includes affordable housing; rural exception site housing; specialist housing for older people; and entry-level exception site housing. We've just discussed the concept of the entry-level exception sites and approved evidence that is relevant to future decision-making by the council on these types of sites. In Appendix 9 of the draft SPD, it is set out the council's proposed approach to decision-making on these sites. Whilst the local plan does not include specific reference to entry-level exception sites, the plan's policy SP4 provides the spatial strategy and provides for a sustainable pattern of housing growth across the plan area. This is the key development plan policy against which these exception sites should be assessed. And Appendix 9 gives the detail of how this should work, taking into account the current policy set out in the Mppf. Finally, there's 2 proposed changes to the Mppf which are particularly relevant to affordable housing. Ruth has already mentioned the raising of the small sites threshold for residential development up to 40 to 50 new homes outside the designated rural areas. And the other issue is the change of concept from entry-level exception sites to first homes exception sites. The fact that those would not apply in designated rural areas at the moment. The entry-level homes exception sites does apply in designated rural areas. So they're already changing what is a relatively new concept that we are currently working with. And finally, because entry-level homes, or first homes as they'll soon be called, because they're developed as a proportion of the market housing on sites, then they are looking to indicating through national policy that a minimum of 25% of affordable houses should be for first homes on Section 106 sites. So notwithstanding the uncertainties over national planning policy, it remains officers' view that it is still appropriate to publish this draft for consultation. The policies in the plan aren't changing, and that is what the SPD is required to provide further guidance on. The Mppf, however many changes it goes through, will remain a material consideration where relevant. If members approve the draft SPD for consultation, when writing to consultees, officers will refer to the council being aware of these relevant proposals to change the Mppf and explain the reasons why that I've just explained, why the consultation is still appropriate. Thank you then for listening.
Thank you, Dave. Yes, obviously this white paper, we keep mentioning it does pose some challenges, but until that becomes statute, we just have to get on with the day job. And this looks like a very much a part of that process. Members, have we got any questions? Don't all volunteer at once, will you now? So, Councillor Brockbank, if you'd like to unmute yourself, please.
Yeah. So the current, the key areas that we have designated, or the groupings that we've got in our local plan at the moment. And we've got Skipton, Settle and Bentham as key areas for development. And then a particular tier, tier 1 and tier 2, and then we've got other tiers. Will all that change? Are we going to reassess all the tiers that we've got? And if we are, then that's going to be an awful lot of work. You know, it's taken us how long to develop this local plan, and we haven't got the time scale to go through all that again in the same detail. Or let me put it another way, we can't take as long to redraft the whole plan as we have done in the past. It just concerns me that if we're going to, how much of the plan are we going to have to change? Like I say, are we going to restructure the tiering? Is it going to be something different? And if it is, and even if it isn't, will all the tiers stay the same? Are we going to be moving different communities into different tiers and regrading those communities? And just finally, it seems to me like they're moving back to the old sort of post-war ideas of having big estates of affordable housing, whereas they've gone away from that and they were being pepper potted among all the developments. And if now they're going to either have an entire development outside of the development limits of a community, then well, I'm a bit speechless, really. You know, these people, they're going to be living in they're living in affordable housing because they either probably can't afford to buy ordinary market housing, and yet we're going to be putting them outside of the towns and the villages. So, and we all know what Craven is like. The buses are terrible. How on earth are they going to reach the services? I think we need to be very, very careful where we allow these sites to be, and I'd like to know if there's been any consideration for that, for how people are going to get to the services. Are we going to improve buses? Are we going to start getting buses back on bank holidays and Sundays, and actually buses during the week as well, more buses during the week? There's an awful lot to consider with this that perhaps isn't coming out immediately when you first read it. And if affordable houses are only going to be allowed on with units of 40 houses and above, then where does that leave the smaller communities where we said a lot of the jobs are probably low paid, and the local people need houses that they can afford on low wages? They can't. The market price of houses in Craven is quite high, and at the moment we tend to have small developments because they're small communities. Are we then going to are we going to be encouraged to allow bigger developments in the countryside? I can't see how it's going to work. I can't visualize it at the moment, and I don't know whether or not Denny or David can perhaps give me a bit of vision.
Can I just say, Mr. Chairman, on that, we're drifting into talking about the white paper, aren't we? And
I'll be interested to hear what the response is. I think I mean, I would just point out, Councillor Brockbank, that the most desirable parts of most of the villages are actually on the edges of the villages with the nice views of the countryside. So it could be argued that we're giving our affordable houses the best view in the town, so to speak, depending on how you look at it. But over to the expert, David, if you wouldn't mind answering Councillor Brockbank's points, and clearly if we are drifting towards white paper territory, please rein us back in, if you would.
Yeah, sure. There's a number of points that were raised, and I think some of them, Councillor, you may be more looking at the white paper than the SPD on affordable housing, but I can see to some extent where there are certain points you've made that do relate to, for instance, entry-level exception sites. So I'll go through in reverse order, trying to answer those questions that relate to the changes in relation to affordable housing and the SPD and the Mppf. Just to reassure you on the 40 to 50 and not having small sites to for affordable housing to maintain the vitality of rural settlements. That rise in the threshold doesn't apply to the designated rural areas, and you'll see, whether you need to look at it now or just make a note, you'll see that page 40 of the SPD, we provide a map of the district with the designated rural areas on the map, sorry, and in those areas we will still be looking at small scale affordable housing on sites between 6 and 10 dwellings. So that's that. On the larger sites that come forward, obviously are outside that area. Obviously our policy H2, the threshold there is more than 10 dwellings. But we are probably going to struggle with maintaining that outside the designated rural areas because of the importance of this change to getting the economy back recovering after COVID. So the idea of the government is to allow small to medium-sized builders to be without the constraint, the financial constraint of affordable houses up to 40 or 50 dwellings. But that's a temporary proposal. As far as post-war large, are we getting back to post-war large estates of council houses or affordable houses? I think you might have got that mainly from the zoning idea in the white paper. So I won't touch on that because that's something that we can deal with afterwards. I don't think it necessarily does mean that we're getting back to that, because there'll still be mixed market and affordable homes together in reasonable proportions. What the entry-level exception sites currently allows in the Mppf is quite large sites on the edge of settlements, because they go up to 1 hectare or 5% of the size of the settlement, and those can be quite large. However, that's changing, and I think in any event our spatial strategy would prevent such larger schemes on the edge of certainly the smaller settlements. So I don't think you need to worry about that from the point of view of the SPD. Services, well, and the settlement tiers, well, our settlement strategy is based on proportionate growth, i.e. larger growth for settlements with more services and facilities, and less growth with less services and facilities. So I don't think the current situation is needing to be worried about in the relationship to services. And as far as are we going to change the tiers, that again is a future local plan issue to do with the white paper. Have I covered most of those points?
Right, thank you, Dave. Councillor Myers, did you need to speak again, or have we?
Well, actually, I mean, yeah, I don't want to get into a big gripe about the government, but very unfortunate. I think particularly for a place like Craven, where most of the developments are under 50 houses. We sold the villages like Gargrave their housing requirements, and they accepted them because there is a need in Gargrave for affordable housing. But sites that are left, and I have no doubt that the builders will progress them whilst they don't have to build affordable housing, mean that Gargrave will take its housing without any benefit, and that will be deeply unpopular. These sites will be built on, there's one up Martin Road, 35, 40 houses, and there'll be no benefit for Gargrave. And that's very, very unfortunate because of what this village is, affordable housing. So I bet they'll all rush to get their application.
Yes, it's feeling like Groundhog Day again, isn't it, towards the end of our local plan being adopted when we saw quite a rush of big applications. David, do you want to come back to that?
Yeah, it's just that I'd just like to say, you recall I pointed out that the increase in threshold doesn't apply to designated rural areas, and Gargrave is a designated rural area. So it's not as bad as perhaps you first thought on that.
Not perhaps so bad for Gargrave, but bad for Skipton, I mean.
It will affect Skipton, yeah. But I have looked at the allocations, for instance, in Skipton, and there's the majority of them are over that limit,
right,
that threshold.
Right. Well, certainly our ones are.
I think obviously members have got concerns, so if you can sort of bear this in mind as this process develops, how it is going to affect our original plans, should we say. Ruth, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, really, just going back to the affordable housing SPD and some of the points that Councillor Brockbank were making, is that obviously the SPD focuses on the many criteria, like Dave has touched on, the many criteria that's included in the policy H2 on affordable housing that's in the local plan, and that deals with the provision of affordable housing through different ways. So it might be developments of over 10 dwellings on greenfield sites and brownfield sites, and the affordable housing in terms of specialist housing for older people is another example. Rural exception sites is another example of the provision of affordable housing, and rural exception sites obviously are should be just for 100% affordable housing, and that might be on the edge of a settlement. But the policy does require that the site is physically and visually well related to the settlement. So, you know, the policy would avoid sort of sites in the middle of the countryside away from existing services and bus routes and things like that. So the SPD really is providing sort of the detail of each element and goes into more detail about each criteria in the policy, so that someone who's submitting a planning application that where there's a requirement for affordable housing can look at the SPD, and hopefully it's clear to them what's required and what the council requires in terms of meeting that policy. That's all I was going to say.
Right, members. I think we'll probably need to have another roll call on this if we are to accept this. Would that be correct, Alex?
Yeah, Chairman, just need a proposer and seconder for the officer recommendation, and then go to the vote. Thank you.
If there's no more debate to be had, members, have I got a proposer and a seconder, please?
I'll propose it, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Myers. Do we have a seconder, please? Councillor Pringle, are you seconding the...
Yeah, I'm happy to second it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. So over to you, Vicky.
Okay, thank you. Right, Councillor Staveley, Chairman.
For?
Councillor Brockbank,
For.
Councillor Myers,
Or
Councillor Pringle,
Or.
Councillor Rose,
Or.
and Councillor Shuttleworth.
Or
Okay, thank you. That's carried. That's unanimous, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, members. Thank you, David. Ruth, much appreciated. Right, on to item 9, Craven Local Plan Monitoring Discussion Papers. It just doesn't get any better, does it? I mean, what a way to spend your evening. Right, who's presenting this one? Is it Ruth?
I'm presenting this one, yeah.
Right, over to you, Ruth.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? Monitoring discussion papers, but yeah, so the purpose of this report is to ask members to agree that the planning policy team prepare a number of monitoring discussion papers, we're calling them, that relate to the ongoing monitoring and review of the adopted Craven local plan, and that specifically these papers will establish links with the council's climate emergency strategic plan, the current one, and any future updates to it. So the scope and the aim of the monitoring discussion papers are to allow collaborative working between officers and members of this subcommittee, so that we can have ongoing discussions together about relating to monitoring and review of the local plan, which is something that in line with the Mppf we're required to do over a period of time. And then following that period of time, if that process identifies that some policies need to be updated, then that there's a plan then to actually update those policies and prepare the evidence and all the rest of it. So if I could just sort of set out what the current Mppf says we have to do in terms of monitoring and review of the local plan. So obviously notwithstanding the proposals in the white paper, the 2019 Mppf sets out that local plans should be kept up to date through a continual process of monitoring and review. So this should be completed. So the Mppf says that this should be completed no more than 5 years from the date of adoption. So for Craven, that means that process should be completed by November 2024. And then any updates to the local plan identified through that process is carried out and evidence is prepared, etc. So that update is done following that 5-year monitoring review period. And that process could tell us that we need to update the entire plan. It could tell us that we need to update individual policies or groups of policies, for example, all the housing policies or all the employment policies. So paragraph 3.5 of the report sets out the work that is required in order to meet the requirements of the Mppf in this respect. So this includes monitoring of the adopted local plan policies against a range of indicators, and we publish that in our authority monitoring report. That the one that will be produced in October this year will be the first one that will actually be monitoring the adopted local plan policies. Other work would be monitoring changes to legislation and the Mppf and the planning policy guidance. So obviously we're keeping our eye on what's happening with the white paper on that and other consultation documents. We also need to monitor any changes in economic, social and rural circumstances that is happening in Craven, and any new economic, social or environmental issues that are coming to the fore as well. Again, the results of that will be presented in the authority monitoring report. We also need to update the evidence base and prepare any new evidence that might be required. So obviously members will be aware that when we prepared the new local plan, a big chunk of the time was taken up with preparing that evidence base and updating that evidence base, because everything in every policy in the local plan has to be justified by evidence. And going forward, you know, looking at the proposals for the white paper, it looks like from what they're saying in there that won't change. So that's something that you know, we've got that bank of evidence that we need to keep up to date as possible. And then if there are any new areas or new policies that we've identified that need to be included in the new local plan or an update to the local plan, then obviously we need to get that evidence there produced as well to justify that. So that's a key piece of work. And also we need to take into account of Craven District Councils and any neighbouring councils' plans and strategies as well. So working with neighbouring authorities on that. So in terms of what the issues that the monitoring discussion papers will cover, what we're proposing in this report is that they will relate to different themes of the adopted Craven local plan. And by discussing those themes, we'll gradually build up a picture, and having that discussion with members on the papers, we'll build up a picture of how the plan and the evidence base will need updating in the future. So obviously that presentation of these monitoring discussion papers and having that discussion with members allows us that to happen, and then at the end of that time period we can come up with a conclusion, really. So I think it's important really to make the point that you know, reviewing and monitoring the local plan is a fluid process that's ongoing, and you know, we've only just adopted our current local plan, but we need to start this process and that it's an ongoing sort of fluid process. So initial discussions that the officers have had with both the chair and vice chair of this subcommittee focus on the issue of how the adopted Craven local plan specifically contributes to achieving a carbon neutral Craven by 2030, which is set out in the council's climate emergency strategic plan, and whether any updates to policies might be required to ensure that the local plan continues to contribute to these priorities as well, and this commitment. So it's suggested that these issues are examined through the monitoring discussion papers, and that the initial papers will look at the role the adopted local plan policies play in contributing to all the themes that are in the climate change emergency strategic plan and the actions. And also it's hoped that by doing that work, then we can, as officers, we can work with other officers in the council that are tasked with preparing that strategic plan and updating it, so that we can work with them on that in terms of identifying any additional themes or new themes or actions perhaps in that as well. So it's a sort of two-way process. So the appendix to the report suggests a format for the monitoring discussion papers, and so we thought that would be useful, because then, you know, so that all these papers look the same, that we've become familiar with that format and how things are set out. And each paper will relate to a specific theme that will be linked to the actions of a particular action of the climate change emergency strategic plan. And it will contain sections. So what we've set out in the appendix is there's sections that relate to the existing evidence base that we have, the relevant adopted local plan policies, any SPDs that are planned or currently be prepared or planned to be prepared that relate to those policies, summary of any changes in circumstances that have been identified, any monitoring data from the latest authority monitoring report, together with a summary of issues identified that are from that evidence or any changes to circumstances and from that monitoring data, which will then identify suggested discussion points. And it'll be those issues and discussion points that will form the crux of the paper, really, so that we can use those to aid our discussions, really. So it's hoped that this suggested format will allow sort of the ongoing collaborative working on a fairly informal basis, really, with the subcommittee, between officers and members on a range of themes relating to monitoring and review of the plan, so that gradually we can build up a picture of how the plan may need updating in the future. And obviously the discussions will therefore inform future planning policy work. So notwithstanding the current proposals to introduce a new style local plan, we envisage that the draft conclusions of this monitoring and review work could be presented to members in, say, October 2023, in readiness for the final results of the 5-year monitoring period to be published in November 2024. So I think it's important to note that until, as we've touched on before, that until the actual reforms of the planning system are confirmed, the council does have a legal requirement to carry out this monitoring and review of the adopted local plan in line with the 2019 Mppf, and the approach suggested in this report will help us to do that. So so members are asked to agree the recommendations set out at 2.1, 2.3 and 2.4 of the report. And in terms of recommendation 2.2, we're asking for members' views really as to whether your members are happy with the suggested format of the monitoring discussion papers, so that we can use that to prepare the first ones.
Right, thank you, Ruth. Yes, the local plan, I think we all had our little bugbears with it, but obviously the thing that we always sort of had reassurance with was that it was, as you say, a fluid process and would be reviewed. Clearly, at one point we were maybe lamenting the fact that we were concerned that the planet might just boil itself dry and we'd all go to hell in a handbasket. And that's before we had the benefit of a pandemic to deal with on top of that. So there's so much to keep us busy. But yes, I think we've got a good format here potentially, and a mechanism that can work so members can hopefully grind our axes where we feel necessary. Councillor Myers.
Yes, well, I'd like to move the recommendations. I'm very happy with the format, and members, all members will be very concerned. We do look at our policies in light of the. Excuse me, that's my dog's misbehaving. This is my 4th Zoom meeting. I've had enough. I don't blame them. Yeah, that we review our policies and make sure they're fit for purpose in light of our declaration of a climate change emergency. It work as a council together on this in all different aspects of our work. And yes, I feel very sorry for officers and for the public that we're doing this at a time that we don't know what's going to happen to the planning process. We're also doing it at a time when we don't know if you'll have a Craven District Council in a 1.5 years' time. But we have to carry on. We have to do our duty and try and make everything work while we can. So, you know, thanks for all your hard work on this. I look forward to working on this. Good to get as much. Good for the benefit of our residents before end of Mordor or the eye of Mordor. Local democracy.
Sharon, good of you to join us. We're not looking at a keyboard anymore. Coronation Street must have finished. Right, I think I've got Councillor Rose. If you'd like to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, with respect to the format for the review, I do think that's a very useful tool to have in that it focuses the discussion. I can imagine that certainly reviewing can take quite some time and people go off at different tangents and so on. So having that 2-page document, I think, will help to focus, which is important, because obviously the whole process needs to be thought about very carefully. Focus is essential. Also allows for comparison between each piece of work that is completed in time. So you haven't got hundreds of different bits of paper all saying something very similar, but a little bit different here or there. So I commend that. I do think that's very spot on, if that's the right phrase. I can't think of a better phrase. And yes, it does seem slightly bizarre, if I may say so, that we are dealing with this enormous project ahead when We don't even know if we're going to exist in 2 to 3 years' time. And I just say thank you to all the officers who are working their socks off with this. And we don't know what's going to happen next. And obviously COVID will have will have changed a lot of this already. So as our review goes through, we'll be reviewing in the light of either continuing COVID or post-COVID. Who knows? So thank you and best of luck to all of us, I think, if I may say so.
Right, thank you, Councillor Rose. Yes, certainly the socio-economic impacts of COVID will be truly a bounty to behold as you're putting together this work. If whoever it is you're working for at the time, it may be Craven District, may not, but I'm sure whatever happens, this information will be of benefit to whoever's door the responsibility of planning policy falls upon. So it's not a wasted effort. I'll just ask the three members who haven't spoken on this, but quite often have plenty to say about the local plan, Councillor Brockbank, Shuttleworth and Pringle, as I see you on my screen. Have you got anything to add to this or a view to make, or could we have a seconder even? Councillor Brockbank or Councillor Pringle, unmute yourself, sir.
I don't want to steal Councillor Brockbank's thunder, but I'm happy to second it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pringle. Councillor Brockbank, have you got anything to say on the matter?
No, I was just going to second it, but I'm quite happy that Councillor Pringle is seconding it.
It's no good staying still, Councillor Shuttleworth. I know you're still there. Have you got anything to add to this?
Sorry, Chairman, I'm just, my mouse has a mind of its own at the moment. Yeah, no, I think all my thoughts have been reflected by previous speakers. We're venturing into the unknown, really, but we've got to do it, as I believe a number of people have said. So let's go for it.
Right. Thank you for that. So, Alex, do we once again go for a vote on this one? Can I ask?
Chair, yes, indeed. You can go for the vote on the recommendation as block. It's been moved and seconded, so you can go to the vote. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Vicky, over to you, please.
Okay. Councillor Staveley, Chairman.
For.
Councillor Brockbank. For. Councillor Myers.
For.
Councillor Pringle.
For.
Councillor Rose.
For.
And Councillor Shuttleworth.
For.
That's carried, Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for that, members, officers. That's a good step forward for us. Right, agenda item 10, Skipton Triangle Master Plan update. Obviously, this is quite an interesting project, even for those of us who aren't Skiptonians, as the saying may go, or resident in that part of our fair county, district. Now then, Ruth, is it you that's presenting this?
Sorry, Chairman. It's Sharon Sumter that's presenting this report.
Sharon, yes, that's why you suddenly appeared. Right.
Yes, that's why. Yes, thank you, Chairman. So the purpose of the report is really to give you a quick update on the position with regard to the preparation of the master plan for an area that we have called the Skipton Station Triangle. So the area focuses on the Skipton railway station up to the bottom of the high street and encompasses two areas that have been allocated as regeneration opportunities in the local plan. So we have, I'm happy to say, we have now completed the procurement and appointed a master planning team to carry it out. It's a two-stage procurement process. The first was an issue of a pre-qualification questionnaire, which was expressions of interest. And we were actually really surprised by the level of interest in doing the work. We got 40 responses. of which then we had to evaluate and come up with a short list of 6 consultants. They were then asked to provide further work on the proposed approach to preparing the master plan, costings and schedule timeline. The 6 tenders received were then invited to give a presentation to officers, well, a small panel of officers, but also the Skipton ward members were invited to listen in, as well as the lead member for enterprise finance and spatial planning. I think it was an interesting 2 days, and it was a very difficult decision in the end. But in the end, it came out as we appointed the master planning team led by Allies and Morrison. They've got there's a engineering company with them, architect, and of course a property consultation. So inception meeting was held on the 3rd of July. They've started work, and the first stage of the work is actually to do with looking at the evidence base and then coming up with some first initial thoughts. So we're expecting the first thoughts to be coming back in the next fortnight. These will then be presented to the member sounding panel, and then the following, then from that, we will go out then to start doing some consultation with stakeholders, landowners, and then coming back and giving members an update on there. So it is about, the preparation is really focused on ensuring that members are involved at all stages throughout this process, and there is extensive consultation with with all the community in Skipton. So just to say that the cost of doing the master plan is actually funded by the York North Yorkshire Local Enterprise Partnership as part of the growth deal scheme that the council's got. So that's it really, my update.
Right, thank you very much, Sharon. Yeah, look as the makings of a very exciting project as this. Obviously, clearly members will, local members will be keen to have their input in this. And it looks like a couple of members on our committee have got something to say. So, Councillor Pringle and then Councillor Rose, then Councillor Myers, please. If you'd like to unmute yourself, Councillor Pringle.
Thank you. You've obviously got 11 members looking at it. How does that sit with the members of this committee? What's our responsibility in all of this, or don't we have any? Thank you.
Yes, the spatial planning committee will be regular consultees as the process progresses, as we get to certain points and where decisions need to be made with regard to which direction we go on, then of course reports will be coming to this committee as well as policy as well. So the group that we've got at the moment is really a sounding board. It's not a decision-making process. So they'll be commenting, and then as and when the work gets more detailed, then we will be coming back to spatial and also policy.
I may stand corrected. I believe that myself and Councillor Myers, through our chair roles and lead roles, we're on that panel, aren't we? Is that?
Yes, you are. Yes.
Yeah.
So if that's okay, Councillor Pringle, we'll go on to Councillor Rose next. If you'd like to unmute yourself, Councillor Rose.
Thank you. Yes, first question was the sounding board. I was interested to know how that sounding board has been made up. being ward councillor for a great chunk of the area under consideration. So I'd be interested to know how that board is made up. Obviously, you've explained that councillors Staveley and Myers are on.
Yeah, it includes all the ward members for Skipton,
Thank
as
you.
well as the lead member for spatial planning, enterprise and finance.
So we'll be informed of the first gathering or sharing of ideas or whatever.
Yeah, yes, the first gathering will be next month. So
Right,
I'm
thank you.
expecting something coming back in the next fortnight to 3 weeks, and then we'll actually call the first meeting of the sounding board.
Right, thank you. I'm very reassured by that. And the second thing I want to say is that it was an absolutely fascinating process being able to see the various presentations. Some of them completely over my head, in the sense that they were presented in a way that was not acceptable, what's the word, accessible. And I was intrigued by the range of people who were interested in the Skipton Triangle. I mean, it was very fascinating. I have to confess, in one, Councillor Mayers knows this, one presentation, I did actually go off and make toast and nearly fell asleep because it wasn't terribly very accessible, but it was good to know that we had that opportunity to see what was going on, and I appreciated that a great deal and learned a lot. And very interesting to see how things progress. So thank you for that.
Councillor Myers next, please.
Yes, Chairman, I echo what Councillor Rose said. It was a very interesting process. I hope that that more of the Skipton members than took part in that will show some interest in it as it progresses. I wasn't terribly impressed with the turnout from Skipton. They were all invited, and I think we got half of them. So there you go. Perhaps they'll realise how important it is as it goes along. But it's a real opportunity to take a very holistic approach to the whole question of area and the benefit for Skipton and for Craven in a wider sense. I think if there's one plus side to this pandemic, it is that we didn't actually embark on this master plan 2 years ago and then find that the picture completely changed. To the extent you can be doing this at the right time, we're doing it at the right time. Because whereas 2 years ago, people might have said, oh, build offices, prime office, we're going to think about it differently now, aren't we? And also because we're more aware of the damage that we've done to our planet and the climate and the need to ameliorate that. So the extent that it can be, it's coming at a very good time. And I think we're very anxious to have as much input from members across the board, not just Skipton, and the public. Will be really enforced on the consultants, the need to consult the stakeholders. It's a really exciting project and hugely beneficial to Craven.
Thank you, Councillor Myers. Yeah, I think it sounds like a good opportunity to iron out a few of the creases that we have in the centre of our first town of Craven. Right, Councillor Brockbank, then Councillor Shuttleworth.
Yes, I think it's a great plan. I just love it. I want to ask though, as far, probably not tonight because we're just noting the contents of this report, but going forward, being chair of planning, and we do have quite a few planning members on here as well. If we're going, are we going to be voting on anything? And if we are, will we need to abstain perhaps in some of the votes?
Can I just say, yeah, Alex will tell you, but planning members aren't on policy, aren't they? most planning members aren't on policy. The decision will be taken by the policy. And those that are may have to abstain or absent themselves. Or Alex will tell them.
Yeah, and I would just make the very general point that in terms of the planning committee, any decisions that members make on that they must keep an open mind on the particular application. Well, that confirms a point. Thank
Thank you.
Yeah. We do make recommendations, Councillor Brockbank. Won't be tied to anybody that ignores them, but you know that's what we're here for, just to make recommendations to policy. Right then, Councillor Shuttleworth, you're sat there like a praying mantis, all poised and ready. I shall wait your wisdom.
It's not wisdom, Chairman, it's an observation. Well, first of all, can I start with the question? And I apologise in advance if I'm supposed to know the answer. As far as can be forecast, what's the overall time scale for this grand plan?
The master plan needs to be completed by March 2021. That's when that's the deadline for the funding. So we need to have completed it by then.
Right, so that's not too far ahead, really, is it?
No, there's a lot of work to be doing.
Yeah, and has anyone dared to come up with any forecast as to when completion of the grand plan may occur?
Well, it all depends what you mean by completion, if you know what I mean. All we're producing is the vision and the documents behind it. The actual implementation, that'll be over a longer period of time.
Right, so we are doing the spade work. Conceivably, some other authority will reap the rewards in concrete terms.
Yeah, we're providing the vision of what you want that area of Skipton to do and look like and everything. And it'll be a tool that planning can use then when proposals come forward to develop, you know.
Right, fine, thank you.
Would it be fair to say that the market itself is going to drive this more? You know, we're just providing the vision, if you like, as you say, but it's the market that will actually make this happen. Would that be a fair assumption?
Yeah, it's setting out what the council would like to see these areas being developed. So then you'll use that to measure any proposals that might come forward. And a part of this also includes a lot of council-owned land as well as private land. So it could be a bit that the council develops some of it, but it'll also be private developers as well.
Maybe, Mr. Chairman, that the council leads the way, and part of the question is, of course, the best use of our assets and how they play into this improvement down and greener transport and all the rest of it. So it's about us using our assets. We may be the drivers if we're still here, but yes, we'll try and hang on to our assets, won't we? We'll be like Cornwall. When they made Cornwall a unitary, they found there were no assets left and there was no money in returns.
I'm sure our cupboard won't be bare. Right, so members, is there any more questions on that? Ruth, are you wishing to speak on?
Just yes, thank you. Just to say that obviously as Sharon described, that the two of the sites that are designated in the local plan, allocated in the local plan as regeneration sites in Skipton in the local plan. And they're contained within the policy SP5, which lists all the allocated sites for housing and employment and mixed-use regeneration sites. And development principles are identified for each of those sites. So obviously the consultants that are commissioned will be looking to try and achieve those development principles. And part of those development principles for those two sites are that a master plan is prepared. So You know, obviously we own some of the sites, we don't own them all, but we're producing or commissioning this master plan. So you know, it's likely then that following the finalisation of the master plan, then it will we'll have to go through the process of being adopted by the council as supplementary planning document, which will then supplement the policies in the plan and the specific development principles for those 2 regeneration sites. So that's a process that will happen after I suppose after March next year, when the you know, the consultants have done their bit.
Right. Thank you very much. Does that raise any more questions from members, or are we happy with what we have been told? That's very good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sharon. Much appreciated. Ruth. Right. So, date of the next meeting, item 11. We've got the date of the 22nd of September. I'm assuming that there's no objections to that.
Chair, just before you go on that, can I assume that that's agreed by consent in terms of the recommendation to know the report?
Apologies, Alex. I didn't realise we needed to do that. So, can we take that was accepted by members? We don't need to have a vote on that, do we?
No, Chairman. Just a consensus is fine. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot of thumbs waving about. So if you've seen somebody you know in the background, or you agreeing with us.
Thank you.
So yes, before I was so rudely interrupted, the 22nd of September. Members, are you all going to be available for the next instalment of spatial planning? That's looking pretty good, I think.
Unless I'm in another meeting about devolution, Chairman.
Don't.
Seem to
You
be
do
coming,
not enjoy yourself.
they're coming thick and fast. Yeah.
Right, so we'll have that, and then the date of the next meeting, 22nd of September 2020, by the miracle of Zoom. Same time again, 6:30. So item 12, any other items? At this moment in time, there's nothing more that really needs to be brought forward. Only to reiterate what I mentioned at the start, that if members have got questions for officers, please copy all the other members of the committee into those where appropriate, so that we all have sight of that. And then officers, as I say, if those questions can be sort of presented by the member at the meeting for transparency's sake, because as I say, it is a hotbed of public interest in spatial planning, quite clearly. So we would hate to think that any members of the public are going to miss out on any of our deliberations. So if there's nothing else, I'd like to call this meeting to an end. Thank you very much, members. It's been